Hello and welcome to this Friday edition of Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you. Let's get started with our big focus. Today was day 2 of Vladimir Putin's state visit to China, and the focus seemed to be on trade and economic ties. The Russian president today visited the city of Harbin, home to a large Russian population. He attended a China-Russia trade fair to underscore the strength of economic links between the two countries. Addressing an industry forum, Putin said the inseparable partnership between the two countries acts as a guarantor of energy security. He met with students at the Harbin Institute of Technology. The Russian president also laid flowers at a memorial to Soviet soldiers who died during the liberation of northeast China from the Japanese in the 1940s. Before arriving in Harbin, Putin was hosted by the Chinese president in Zhongnanhai, a compound where China's leaders work and reside and which is reserved only for China's closest allies. This comes a day after a series of meetings between Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping, where the two praised their deep ties and no-limits partnership. Putin has said he also spoke about Ukraine and that both leaders wanted to find a political solution to the war. China's peace proposals unveiled last year have been criticized by both Kiev and its Western allies. This is Putin's first international visit since the start of his 5th presidential term, following an election where he ran virtually unopposed. Putin has faced a degree of international isolation for his invasion of Ukraine. China has a tense relationship with the United States, which has labelled it a competitor, and faces pressure for continuing to supply key components to Russia needed for weapons production. Russia has looked to China as a lifeline as it faces hundreds of sanctions from the US and its Western allies that aim to cripple Moscow's war machine. Beijing has been accused of aiding Moscow's war by supplying technology and components. China says the allegations are baseless and it's nothing more than routine economic and trade transactions. Putin's two-day visit aims to grow trade ties between the two countries and comes amidst growing warnings from the US to China against supporting Russia's military-industrial base. Trade between Russia and China increased to $240 billion last year as China helped its neighbor blunt the impact of Western sanctions. Putin wants China to reaffirm its support, particularly economic support for Russia, as it continues to deal with Western sanctions. He wants assurances that China will continue to send through manufacturing equipment and technology. Imports from China have become critical for Russia's wartime economy. Analysts say Putin may also have tried to push for progress on the stalled gas pipeline proposals from Russia to China known as the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. China already buys gas and oil from Russia. China has emerged as a key economic lifeline for Russia over the last 2 years. The two-way trade between them increased 26% last year, and Russia is now China's 6th largest trade partner. But some say China is looking to moderate its trade ties with Russia under pressure from Europe and the United States. Official Chinese customs data shows China's outbound shipments to Russia were actually down 10% in April and 13% in March from the previous year. Chinese banks have also been rejecting transactions with Russian importers and are reportedly tightening their requirements due to the threat of the US sanctions. Also, analysts point out that Putin has publicly fostered closer ties with Kim Jong-un and is using North Korean weapons on the battlefield. China will want to make sure Russia is still restrained in what type of military technology it is sharing with the North Koreans. China also benefits from Russian diplomatic experience at the United Nations and Russia's role as a security provider in Central Asia. While there is no doubt that the West is keeping a hawk's eye on the Putin-Xi bromance, India too is watching the bonhomie closely. New Delhi has concerns about the growing Russia-China defense ties. 60 to 70% of Indian defense supplies come from Russia, and India needs regular supplies, especially at a time when Indian and Chinese soldiers are locked in a standoff at the border for the last 4 years. Some Western analysts have cautioned India about a scenario in which Russia becomes a junior partner of China. At the same time, India would not want the Russian defense industry to suffer as a result of Western sanctions. Seeing an old friend and a wily foe come together in a major display of strong partnership amid shifting alliances in an ever-evolving geopolitical landscape Does India need to worry?
Sanctions against third countries participating in economic activity are illegitimate, especially without a UN Security Council decision. When applied to third countries, they lack common sense. Settlements should be discussed among economic participants with state-level support where necessary. Large financial institutions avoid losses from the US authorities' legal actions. However, this is a grave mistake by the US political elites, as it undermines trust in the dollar and harms themselves. I extend a warm welcome to President Putin for your state visit to China. This visit, being your first foreign engagement since assuming your new term as the Russian president, underscores the significant importance you and the Russian government place on strengthening China-Russia relations, a sentiment highly appreciated by China. This year commemorates the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between China and Russia, marking a historic milestone in bilateral relations. Over these 75 years, our nations have forged a path of mutual respect and cooperation, setting an example for major and neighboring countries. Through concentrated efforts, our bilateral relations have advanced steadily, characterized by comprehensive strategic coordination and robust cooperation in various fields, including economy, trade, investment, energy, culture, and people-to-people exchanges. Additionally, cooperation at the subnational level and in other domains has flourished. These endeavors have made positive contributions to global strategic stability and the promotion of democratic principles in international relations.
We also believe that the People's Republic of China's essential reconstitution of Russia's defense industrial base is deeply problematic, and we will monitor this space closely and take appropriate actions independently through other multilateral fora should we need. And we continue to say directly, and we have, the Secretary has been direct on this with his counterparts, that the PRC cannot have it both ways.
All right, so how is the West viewing this important visit and how should New Delhi view it? We're going to discuss that with our panel of experts in just a moment after this quick break.
Helps beat sensitivity fast. Sensodyne Rapid Relief.
हर पल मनाओ केसरी त्योहार विमल बोलो जुबान केसरी.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
Forever, there are simultaneous election of Parliament, Assembly, and Municipality and Panchayat. So that framework has to be given in the Constitution. That amendment has been suggested.
Are you going to take away the power of dissolution?
I mean, it doesn't require any rocket science to do this. It's a simple constitutional amendment, and the idea is everything goes together.
The Law Commission has set the ball rolling for one nation, one election. Basically, if all goes well, then India may see simultaneous elections to Lok Sabha, state assemblies, municipalities and panchayats in 2029.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing Russian President Vladimir Putin's two-day state visit to China. All right, let's go straight across to our guest. Joining me on Global Lens tonight, Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar, former Indian diplomat, Professor Sanjay Kumar Pandey, chairperson of the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Patikrit Pine, foreign affairs analyst. A warm welcome to all my guests. Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar, let me start with you. I want to look at it in two parts. One, there is no doubt the West would have watched this visit with a hawk's eye. A growing partnership between China and Russia, which the two countries now describe as a no-limits partnership, is no doubt a matter of huge concern for the West. And then the other aspect that we want to look at is how should New Delhi view this? We have a very important relationship with Russia, especially in the defense sector. 60 to 70% of India's defense supplies come from Russia. Then there is for China on the other side, with whom we've been locked in, a standoff at the border for the last 4 years. And seeing Russia going deeper and deeper into the embrace of China is a matter of concern for both the West and for New Delhi, especially when analysts point out that Russia could very well become a junior partner of China. How do you think the West and New Delhi would be viewing this visit?
Yeah, thank you very much, Neha. And I agree with you when you say that, the world is watching this visit, with a very keen eye, because it is a very significant partnership. Of course, the partnership has not started with the visit of President Putin. I think it really started in 2014 after the referendum in Crimea and the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. And after that, the sanctions were imposed, and slowly and gradually but surely Russia has been pushed increasingly into the embrace of China. So you say that the West does not wish that Russia should become a junior partner of China. But I think it's a debatable point whether it is not already a junior partner of China, because its dependence on China over the last 10 years now has been growing. Also, the phraseology of the no limits partnership, that first came out in February of 2022 when Putin went to China for the, I think it was the
Winter Olympics.
The Winter Olympics, that's right. That was the time, and the general assessment seems to be that the attack started in Ukraine started on the 22nd of February. So he had told Xi that the attack will take place after the Olympics finish, which it did. So I think the level of confidence between the two countries is huge. It has been growing. Of course, the West has been concerned and anxious that there should not be some sidestepping of the sanctions in terms of providing some critical materials and technologies and components to Russia. And I think the recent visits of Janet Yellen and Antony Blinken to China have definitely emphasized this point, that as far as the Russian war effort is concerned, it should not be supported by China. But after the sanctions, the importance, significance of Chinese market for energy, for fossil fuels, for gas. You mentioned about the Power of Siberia 2 lines, in which it was after 2014, it was decided that increasing quantities of gas and oil will go to China. And that has, of course, increased very significantly. You mentioned $240 billion bilateral trade last year, which has gone up by 26%, meaning that is to be expected. I think even if you look at the other countries, whether it is Central Asia or others, their economic relations, trade relations with Russia have skyrocketed over the last 2.5 years, because basically the imports as well as exports to the West have been curtailed. And Russia is now looking towards Asia. So it is focusing much more on Asia, whether it is ASEAN, whether it is China, whether it is India. So I think this is something that is the Asia pivot that Mr. Putin has launched. So that it is born out of necessity. But, coming back to your question as to how the West would be looking at it with concern, but I'm sure it is not coming as a surprise that, this has happened, because it has been playing, it has been growing. But it is if the two countries continue to come together and the partnership continues to strengthen, it is worrying for India also. But India has its open, independent connect and engagement with Russia, which we need to focus on. Particularly, what the External Affairs Minister has said today, that earlier it was security and political engagement. And now, over the coming period, it is also going to be economic and trade relations, which have gone. I remember when I used to be in Moscow, it used to be to the tune of $8 billion, $10 billion. Today, it is in the range of about $60 billion. So I think this should not be seen as a flash in the pan, but needs to be taken forward, not only in the area of fossil fuels, but also in a large number of other areas. Neha.
All right. Thank you so much for that comprehensive analysis. You used an interesting term there. Is it an Asia pivot that President Vladimir Putin is making? And what does it mean for India to see, as I keep saying, an old friend and a wily foe come together? I need to take a quick break here on Global Lens, but we'll continue this conversation on the other side. Don't go away.
Can the Trinamool candidate from Baharampur hit the ball out of the park?
50-60 दिन बहुत ज़्यादा बोल रहा हूँ, उससे पहले ही काम दिखने स्टार्ट हो जाएंगे.
Pitted opposite Pathan in Team BJP is Dr. Nirmal Kumar Saha.
The fight is not Adit Chaudhary and Nirmal Saha. The fight between Modi versus Rahul Gandhi.
Yusuf Pathan and Nirmal Saha, two professionals who have switched to politics, are taking on Congress leader Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary. Can one of the first-time politicians end his winning streak? This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing Putin's state visit to China. Let me go across to Pathikrit Pain now. Pathikrit Pain, there are two aspects to this. What does this visit mean from the perspective of the West, and how would New Delhi look at it? Now, the West has increasingly in the recent past accused China of shoring up Russia's wartime economy, something that China, of course, denies. But given that their bilateral trade stood at $240 billion last year, clearly China has an important role to play there. Is that perhaps the biggest thorn in the side of the West as far as the growing Russia-China relationship is concerned. And on the other hand, when we talk about Russia becoming a junior partner of China, while that would be, a matter of concern for the West, is that not a source of worry for New Delhi as well? How do you think New Delhi would have viewed the bromance between its old, time-tested friend, Vladimir Putin on the one hand, and a wily foe like Xi Jinping on the other?
Megha, good evening. See, first of all, let me tell you from the Indian perspective, I think India has, more or less dehyphenated its relation when it comes to Russia and China, because on several occasions in the past, this relationship has been developing for quite some time. But even during the peak of challenges, India did take S-400. India did have major deals with Russia, in spite of the fact that the Russians were deepening the relationship with China, something which literally, if you ask me, the West compelled Russia to do it. So if you look at from the perspective of what's happening in Ukraine, it is a war going on, a war which could have been avoided by both the sides. It's not just the Russians to be blamed. There is an equal amount of blame that should be there from the NATO side also, who wanted Ukraine to literally play the part of a proxy to fight a war against Russia, which they themselves don't want to fight. And in the last 2 years rather, the West has funded Ukraine in terms of military aid to the extent of $80 billion. So it is not typically a Russia-Ukraine war going on. It is a war in which the West is funding to the extent of that amount. Invariably, for a country like Russia, which is deeply under sanctions, what options do they have other than actually holding the hand of a country which may be a concern for India, maybe a concern for the West? But from the Russian perspective, what else can they do in terms of ensuring that they get a seamless supply of dual-use products like the nitrocellulose or the microelectronics or many other components which are of critical requirement in Russia today? So frankly speaking, if the West, in spite of all the comments they will make, the kind of trade relation United States has today with China to the extent of $750 billion plus, they will make a lot of noise, but they might put sanctions to some companies here and there, the Chinese companies, but they will not do anything more than that. And let me tell you one statement which Putin made recently is that these sanctions are reducing the credibility and the trust on dollar. This is a very important issue. You want the whole world to use dollar as your default currency, and at your whim you would impose sanctions. You would you freeze the dollar reserve. You would not allow countries to use the SWIFT payment mechanism system. I mean, what is happening to Russia can happen today to India as well, because already the Americans are giving threats of a sanction because we had a 10-year
over the Chabahar port. Correct.
Yes. So let me tell you, is it a genuinely free world today, or is it that on every occasion, the West knows the best what is good for the rest? That is something that we need to come out of. The West must understand that it is the West which pushed Russia into the arms of China. It could have been the other way around. There are so much of allegations that merely within 2 months after the war started in Ukraine, there was a possibility of Ukraine and Russia going for a ceasefire. It was not allowed. Now, let me tell you one more thing, Neha. If you look at the sanctions on Iran, on Russia, first of all, they've imposed sanctions on such a big country, exporting oil. What options they have than to go to China? And secondly, look at from the perspective of a country like India. You impose sanctions on Iran, you impose sanctions on Russia, you impose sanctions on Venezuela, and you create artificial scarcity in the supply side, so that the price of oil goes up to $80 to $90 a barrel. Let me tell you, if you take away the sanctions from these countries, the price of oil will crash down to less than $40. It will benefit developing countries like India. And that is why Prime Minister Modi has been completely against unilateral sanctions. We do have problems with China, no denial of that. But in spite of that, when it comes to BRICS, when it comes to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there are areas of convergence that we have. There are areas of divergence we have, and there are areas of status quo that we have. So on one issue, I think all these countries do agree that we are completely against unilateral sanctions. And if this has to be an era of no war, then for that, the onus is as much on the West as it is on Russia. It cannot be a one-way traffic. Because when the American Senate, gives $61 billion to Ukraine, certainly this money is not going to go to Ukraine. It is going to the military-industrial complex of United States, which ensures that geopolitical triggering here and there, that war keeps on happening, whether it is there or it's in Gaza.
Or in Gaza.
Speaking, I am not trying to. I'm not trying to say that I know everything of what should be done. But if it is that Russia, if it has to be blamed, then equal amount of share of the blame has to be on the West.
Has to go to the West
China,
as well. Yes.
China, my last point.
Yes.
My last point, who made China so powerful today? The outsourcing game that the West did in terms of manufacturing is what made China today. And today, they cannot afford to have any sanction on China beyond a point, because it would raise the price of goods and services within their own countries. So they, on one hand, will have very good relation with China when it comes to trade, but they don't want anyone else to have it. Same with India, they do. So I think if it has to be an equal world where there is peace, I think a little bit of course correction is needed from the West also, because post-Cold War, there was no need of a NATO. Post-Cold War, Russia could have been a great ally of the West.
And that is what the two leaders, in fact, referred to. When they met in Beijing, they slammed what they called a lingering Cold War mentality. And it's interesting, your choice of words earlier, that the West seems to believe that it knows what's best for the rest. And both you and Ambassador Sajjanar seem to agree that the West is responsible for pushing Russia into the embrace of China. All right, we'll continue this conversation on the other side of another break.
I don't think anybody has isolated Ajit Dada Pawar. Ajit Dada has isolated himself.
That led to a lot of bad blood between the ruling partners.
It is not true. You know it very well, who these elements are, who these individuals are. And these are the very reasons why you see a division in the party.
Now this contest between Supriya Sule and Sunetra Pawar is really a proxy war between uncle and nephew, and it's being fought in the family bastion of Baramati.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
I don't think anybody has isolated Ajit Dada Pawar. Ajit Dada has isolated himself.
That led to a lot of bad blood between the ruling partners.
It is not true. You know it very well, who these elements are, who these individuals are. And these are the very reasons why you see a division in the party.
Now this contest between Supriya Sule and Sunetra Pawar is really a proxy war between uncle and nephew, and it's being fought in the family bastion of Baramati.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
Has Allu Arjun arrived, or he's just taking off?
If I really want to hit a moonshot, I want the moon.
These are big stories.
It's very unique to Indian cinema.
What would be the relevance of tradition?
I would believe that the first change has to come in the mind.
World premiere on the 18th of May, only on News 9 Live at 9 p.m.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we are looking at the significance of President Putin's state visit to China. Let me go across to Professor Sanjay Pandey now. Professor Pandey, it is very clear that as Putin and Xi Jinping talk about their no limits partnership, the focus is largely on economic and trade ties. It is no secret that in the last 2 years, thanks to Western sanctions that have been imposed on Russia with an aim to cripple its war economy, China has emerged as a lifeline for Russia's economy. As I keep mentioning, that volume of trade stood at $240 billion last year. Do you believe that, this economic relationship will continue to grow in the face of all the Western pressure? Or do you believe that China would not want to upset the apple cart too much, given that there is the threat of US sanctions, and would therefore want to adopt a somewhat calibrated approach, given that we've seen how, Chinese banks in the recent past, for instance, have tightened controls as far as trade with Russia is concerned? How do you see this economic relationship panning out in the days ahead?
Well, I would say a couple of things need to be clear before we discuss it. First, that China has been the #1 trading and economic partner of Russia from Russian side, from Russian perspective, for more than 10 years. In fact, 13 years, since 2011, much before the Crimean crisis started, much before the Ukraine war started. Secondly, that even during the last 3-4 years, the trade has increased, every year on year. Last year, it was 190 billion. This year, as you very rightly said, it's 240 billion. So despite the sanctions on Russia, and despite the Western and US warnings to China, the trade has actually increased. The only thing that has come down is Chinese exports to Russia, and that some say is surely in order to impress US and the West, that the Chinese are not selling some of the sensitive technology and dual-use items, semiconductors or chips, which can be used by Russia for military purposes. So the trade is still likely to, if not grow, at least stabilize at what is already a very high volume. Russia is China's 6th or 7th largest, and as I said, China is Russia's #1 trade partner for the 13-14 years straight. So the relationship definitely has a very core economic trade aspect and basis, but at the same time, security, geopolitics are also very important aspects of this relationship. And some would say that in the last 2 years, it is more of security and geopolitics. Trade, of course, has been there for quite some time. Coming to geopolitics and security ties, this is also something which is not very new, although we find a new momentum in this. The security ties have been improving in the last nearly 1.5-2 decades. But after 2014, there is a new, for example, some of the very sensitive technologies before 2014, the Russians were not supplying. They were even hesitant to supply the most advanced versions of Sukhoi. But after 2014, the Russians have not only been ready to supply the advanced weapon systems, but also they are not hesitant to transfer the technology. So whether it is economic or security, the two have been, these two countries have seen a qualitative increase. Plus, there are other factors which have strengthened the ties. For example, both, especially in the last 10 years, have been very wary of the US, what they see as US unilateralism and hegemonism, and US attempts to interfere in internal affairs of the other countries. In fact, the whole talk of civilization, civilizational ethos that the two countries have come out with is basically aimed at emphasizing that sovereignty and territorial integrity of states need to be respected. There should be no interference in that. And each country has the sovereign right to decide its political and economic model based on its own historical, cultural, civilizational experience and based on its own understanding of history and its own requirements. So it is the sovereign right of countries to decide their political and economic model and future without outside interference. And therefore, this opposition to what they see as regime change or color revolutions, or what is they call humanitarian intervention or democracy promotion, which is basically, they believe, is an attempt to interfere in other countries' internal affairs by US and the West.
Okay, the Western's style of democracy, or the West's notion of democracy and its perceived imposition on other countries, along with, the unilateralism and hegemony of the US that you talk about, these are factors that clearly countries like China and Russia are miffed with. But let me go back to Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar at this point. Ambassador Sajjanhar, again talking about what all of this means for New Delhi. Now, last year, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi undertook a state visit to the United States, we saw some path-breaking defense deals being struck between the two sides, that included technology transfer, something that was happening for the first time between India and the United States. Many thought that was America's way of weaning India off its dependence on Russia. Many thought India also wanted to sort of keep its options open, even though we've had a very old, defense relationship with Russia. So, in the recent past, India has tried to sort of walk that tightrope and do a balancing act vis-a-vis its relations with the US on the one hand and Russia on the other. How do you think that now that the shoe is on the other foot, how would New Delhi want its time-tested friend, Russia, to do the same vis-a-vis India and China?
Yeah, thank you very much, Neha. Just a couple of points here, the comment that you made. I think at this particular moment, the figure that you mentioned, 60 to 70% that India imports defense equipment from Russia. I think over the last few years, this figure has come down quite significantly. I think the latest figures from SIPRI would suggest that it is more in the range of 40-45% that we are dependent, but that is also a very huge number, huge percentage that it comes from there. And over the last several years, I remember I was in Washington when we signed the first US-India defense agreement in 2005, July 2005, just before the US-India civilian nuclear deal was signed. And today, I think the United States has emerged as the second or the third largest defense supplier to India, whether, it is the drones or, Sky Dragons, or it is Apache, or it is, you name it, the Chinooks helicopters, what we used on the border in Galwan. But let me not go into that because, that's a subject by itself. The point I wanted to make is that Russia has emerged as US has emerged as a very significant defense partner. And what you mentioned last year when Prime Minister Modi was in the US in June, then we signed the agreement also for transfer of technology of G414 engines, and of course a large number of other areas. So that partnership is very strong. I think it is the most consequential partnership as far as India is concerned. And of course, the partnership with Russia is also a very significant option without any choice, so that, it has only China to go to. And I think Russia recognizes that, and that is why we see all the comments that are coming from Russia, from the top echelons of the Russian leadership, saying that this relationship with India continues to be strong, and we need to continue to find ways to further expand, Russia's invitation to India to collaborate in the Arctic, to collaborate whether it is the INSTC, whether it is on the Chabahar project. I think all these are indications that it is, Russia also wants to ensure that it does not, fall completely into, it has no other choice except China. I think both India and Russia realize it, and they are willing to strengthen their partnership, the China-Vladivostok connectivity through the INSTC, etc., and so many others. And that is what has been mentioned today also by the External Affairs Minister.
Okay, interesting. So, Patikrit Pan, as we wrap up this discussion, I want to ask you this question. I think we have proven in the last 2 years since the Russia-Ukraine war began that we deeply value our, historical ties and what Foreign Minister Jaishankar has repeatedly referred to as time-tested friendship with Russia. We were one of those few countries that never condemned Russia for its invasion. We continue to import oil from Russia despite criticism and pressure from the West, asserting in the process our strategic autonomy. Also, if you look at the G20 summit that took place in September last year in New Delhi, the fact that there was not a single reference to Russia in the context of the Ukraine war was actually seen by many as a diplomatic win for India on the one hand and also for President Putin on the other. So if we have sort of displayed that sort of sensitivity towards Russia, my question to you is, how sensitive do you believe Russia truly is to India's concerns vis-a-vis China?
So also let me add you, Neha, not only we were importing oil from Russia, the Europeans were buying the same refined oil from India, which was coming from Russia.
Yes.
So there was this duality that the Europeans actually displayed. See, let me tell you, you are absolutely right. I think one thing we must appreciate what the government of India in the last few years has done is that it cannot be an issue of binary all the time. The West cannot always look at it that either you are with US or against US. Similarly, when it comes to India, we have tried to have good relation on both sides. Let me tell you one thing. While we have been, in certain way been a little neutral on the Ukraine issue, but we have also condemned on some of the incidents that happened, and we have